Good evening, everybody. I hope you've been having a wonderful Travel Writers and Photographers Conference so far. Some of us were thinking that we should probably extend it a few more days. Is everybody okay with that?
Is it okay with you?
She'll be surprised. It'll be a surprise. So unbelievably enough, it's already Saturday night. I have no idea how that happened, but it's the last night of the conference. I hope you've gotten something good from it. We'll talk more about that tomorrow, but I hope it's been valuable to you and inspirational to you. And we have a wonderfully, I think, inspiring evening ahead of us. Two great writers, Andrew McCarthy and Tim Cahill. We're just going to talk about the art and craft of traveling and travel writing and adventuring and what happens when you put yourself out there in the world.
You get a beer?
That's called jet fuel. So I just thought I would begin because I'm not sure that everybody here is familiar with your stories, and I thought it would be kind of inspiring, because one of the things I always tell people in my workshops, when I teach workshops, is that whoever your iconic travel writer is, whoever you're the person you think, oh my goodness, if I could only be like them someday, that person at some point in their life was absolutely anonymous. They weren't the famous XYZ. They weren't published in all the places they're published now. They'd never really gotten published anywhere. They were struggling, just like some of you may feel that you're struggling. Every single famous writer in the world was not a famous writer at some point in their lives. And it's a really, really empowering thing to remember that. My mentor, John McPhee, submitted something like 25 stories to the New Yorker before he got one published. And when he told me that when I was an undergraduate in school, when he told me that, I thought, wow, I can get a lot of stories not published. That's something to really shoot for. So, you know, it's good to know that. So I wanted to ask, first of all, just the how I got started story. How did you two get started? Of course, Andrew, you had a career of another kind, but I'd like you both to talk about how you got started. Andrew.
I started travel writing when, is this on? Is this work? Is it fun?
Yeah.
I'd experienced travel had changed my life the way it changes probably all of our lives. And so I, by accident, began writing about it because I was traveling. I always traveled alone, far from home, and usually for a fairly long period of time. And I became kind of untethered in a certain way, and I thought if I kept a journal that would be a good idea. It would help sort of ground me. So I tried to keep a journal, and I discovered I was a terrible journal keeper. Everything was like, the food's really bad, and I'm so lonely, and why was I always home? You know, I was a terrible journal keeper, so I stopped doing that. And one day I was in Saigon, and a kid came up to me next to me on a scooter, and he said, I give you a ride. I said, no, leave me alone. I give you a ride. Leave me alone. I give you a ride. So anyway, I got on his scooter, and he toured me around Saigon for the day. And it was a fascinating afternoon. He didn't take me to any of the tourist sites. He took me to where his father had been arrested, where his mother used to garden, and it was interesting. And interesting only because he sort of shared it with me in his own weird way. And anyway, I went home to my hotel that night, and I wrote down what happened. I'd been an actor for years and years, and so I knew sort of story without knowing I knew story, and I knew dialogue because I've said so much bad dialogue in my acting career. I know dialogue. So I started to capture without knowing it. The dialogue propels the story and all this kind of. So anyway, I wrote it down, and it seemed to capture my experience the way my journaling didn't. And I felt better when I did that. And so I did that, and I kept traveling. Whenever I wasn't acting, I would go traveling because I felt more like myself when I was. The further from home I got, the more like me I felt. I liked that, so I kept doing it. And then for about 10 years, I kept these little journals with no intent. Not journals, but little stories, incidents that happened to me, little micro stories. And one day, I just kind of thought I'd like to do something with that. And it evolved, and then I knew someone who knew an editor at the magazine, and he agreed to have a drink with me. And again, Keith Fellows at National Geographic Traveler, and he said, I said, you should let me write for your magazine. And he said, you're an actor, dude? And I said, yeah, but I know how to travel and I know how to tell stories, what I do for a living. And he thought that was a good answer. And eventually, anyway, long story longer, about a year later, I badged him with pitches, with, when he came, we became friendly, and eventually I said, look, if it doesn't work out, you don't have to pay me. And he said, okay, I'll send it. That's me. So anyway, so I went to Ireland, I wrote a story, and it worked out, and then it sort of eventually grew from there. And that's how it started.
So just remember that. Go to the editor and say, you don't have to pay me. That's good.
How did I start out? Well, I was a late reader, learning how to read, but once I learned how to read, it was amazing to me. I was one of those kids. I still have insomnia because I think I trained myself to have it by reading the book under the covers with the flashlight. And from the time I was 12 years old, I thought I wanted to be a writer. I never told anyone. It was kind of because I so respected people who wrote things that moved me, that I thought they must be like gods. And for me to say that I wanted to be a writer would be to say, well, I want to be like God. It's I never said anything. It was a secret, sort of like masturbation or something. I never told anybody.
I wasn't expecting that. So.
I was straight to sex pact.
I know.
Well, it was a kind of, that's the way you kept the secret. I mean, I realize now that writers aren't gods. Many writers, I have half my friends are writers, and believe me, they're not gods. But I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin. Nobody was a writer, and I went to the University of Wisconsin. I graduated. I went to law school for about a year, and I did very, very well. And I realized, shit, if this keeps up, I'm going to be a lawyer. And I said, well, you really want to be a writer. That's what you want to do. And so I came to San Francisco, which was like a moronic thing to do, because all of writing is in New York. But there was this little teeny tiny magazine called Rolling Stone.
Which was teeny tiny at the time.
It was. I remember about the third year we were there, we had a big champagne party because we'd gotten over 100,000 subscribers. But anyway, I came out to San Francisco. I submitted some stuff to San Francisco State. They let me get an MFA there, and then I worked part-time jobs trying to support my writing habits. So everything that's on the author's bio of a first novel, bartender, warehouse, longshoreman. I did all that. Any part-time job I could get to support it. And I don't mean to be. It's not going to happen. Maybe, but it took me 2 years. 2 years. I was writing all the time, and I made in 2 years a total of $700.
Wow.
And then I got a job at this place called Rolling Stone, and I started writing for them. And it took off after that.
It's interesting though that you said you told no one when you wanted to be a writer. When I discovered the first time I acted, I was in the school of play, I stepped on stage, and it was such a big experience. I think my first impulse was tell no one, because it was so important. It was just like mine, and if it wasn't ready to be exposed to the air, you know what I mean, and get swacked by the world.
Right.
You know, it's just a little nugget that sometimes needs to grow for a long time before we're ready to go out with things.
But now we're here, I mean, when I grew up, I suspect you didn't have an acting mentor or...
I couldn't need you, no one I knew. When I told my parents eventually that I wanted to be an actor, my father's response was, no son of mine is going to be an effing thespian. He did not say effing, you know, so, yeah, it was like theater stock.
And Waukesha, Wisconsin is not really a hotbed of writers where I grew up. And I don't know why I kept it to myself, but this is kind of cool. Look at everybody out here. You're talking to us. You're seeing us. You understand very quickly that we're not gods, as I thought writers were.
That's part of our role here, is to prove that we're not gods.
And I'm dead set on proving that.
Yeah. So, what was the, like, I'm going to ask this, Andrew, you may have already answered this question, but what was the push, the sort of quantum leap that got you from one stage to where you thought, yeah, you know what, I can do this, I can actually be a writer?
I haven't got there yet, but you know, it's well. When I first started, when I met Keith Bellows, the first thing was, why would you want to do this? You're not going to make any money. You have the most glamorous job on the planet. You're not going to make any money. This is not. You don't get what this is. And it was just like, it was the same with acting. It's sort of like this type. I feel like me when I do this, and that's all I ever wanted was to feel. And so I pursued acting, and then when the writing thing came, the travel writing thing came, it just was, I felt like me, it felt right to do it, you know, and so I don't, you remember your question, but it was, there was no decision, and then suddenly things sort of evolve, and you just sort of follow them, and it feels right to do this, well, I keep doing it, and when it stops feeling right, then shift gears.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not trained in anything. I couldn't hold down a job. You know what I mean? So I've only made passions professions. So that's all I know how to do is follow that sort of internal nudge.
Yeah, yeah. Just to follow up with your sort of timeline, you did the Ireland story. Keith said this works, we'll publish it. And then was it easy to get
And then
the
he
next
didn't publish
one?
it for 3 years.
Yeah, well,
Because it's Keith.
Yeah. Anyway, so then I pitched him another one, and then eventually he said to me, I kept pitching ideas, and I did another story that didn't come out for a while, and anyway he said I kept pitching stories because I kept having more ideas going, I love this is great. So, and I was good at pitching because I just knew a provocative, just sort of like movie trailers. I go, I could just see it, you know, and so. And I knew the story, just follow the story, you know, and that, the only advice I would ever give to a travel writer is it's not about the destination, it's about the story.
It's
Tell
about
me a
the
story.
story.
Tell me a story and tell me a destination. You know, first, that's the only, I guess someone said, it's not about destination, it's about story. And so, I forgot.
It's about story. He said all you need to know. It's about story.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And I do want to say that Andrew got on an airplane very, very early this morning in order to be here. He literally just flew in today to be here tonight. So it's really awesome. It's great.
No. So anyway, I know what it was. So eventually, so I was pitching this editor over and over, and he goes, "These are all great, but go meet some other editors because I can't do all these stories." So I went to a writers' conference where other editors were at, and I pitched them, and suddenly I had 5 different magazines I could write for, and then, you know, it expands out like that. That's how it sort of moved on.
Right. Yeah.
You know, eventually, like anything, there becomes a tipping point where things just sort of breed on themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you have the story published in Travel, right? When you went to the other editors.
Yes, because I needed.
Okay, so you had a clip.
I needed a clip. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And a good clip. That's a good clip.
That's fine. Yeah.
That's a good clip. How are you, Tim? What was your quantum leap moment?
I don't know, it seems like a gradual, gradual uphill slog.
It's the
to me.
Kilimanjaro.
Yeah. When I went to Rolling Stone, my job was described to me as editorial drudge. And I was to read what's called the slush pile. Those are all the manuscripts that come in, some of them written by people with crayons and stuff. And believe me, I was ambitious and tried to find something good in the slush pile, and I never did. And then my friend Ben Fong Torres had a family tragedy, and he had to go away for a while or deal with his family tragedy. And he wrote what in Rolling Stone was called 2020 News. It was music news. Well, I listened to music, but I didn't know the inside stuff. So I had to figure that out. Big piles of Variety on my desk and all that kind of stuff. And I wrote that for a while and did a pretty good job. And then I had to write rock and roll for 2 years. And then I said, okay, I mean, this is all right. I mean, you meet the rock and roll band, you go to the sound check with the rock and roll band, you sit behind the stage with the rock and roll band, you go back to the hotel and smash up some hotels, and then you get on a plane and fly to Cleveland. And I said, well, you know, all right, I've pretty much seen this now. And so I got fired. I got fired 6 times.
Fired 6 times.
6 times. I thought I had the record, but a guy named David Felton has beaten me by a long shot. You know, I got fired, and I went out and I did a story for Esquire, and the editor-publisher Jan Wunner said, "He's our guy. What the hell?" And so he hired me back at a better salary. He went like this. It's like a pendulum. That's, money, money, money. We're you know, the memos, save paper clips, and then it went up to here. Is Cahill working for us anywhere? Let's fire him. And then the pendulum would go back, and it would come up to, we need more quality. Where's Cahill? I mean, literally 6 times. And I could have been rehired 7, but I said, you know, I'm actually tired of this now.
What was your first travel story?
You know, it may have been the first story I ever wrote. I was thinking that I was going to be the great American novelist. That was my like your plan.
Of course.
And so I was working, and I made that money writing little pieces of fiction for magazines. And a friend of mine named Jim Gorman, who is an artist, he drew outside stuff, he drew birds and stuff like that. And he said, you know, I can't get any of this stuff published, but because I don't have any writing behind it, you're a writer, write something. And I don't know much about birds. I have ornithological dyslexia. But I used to have, I lived in Mill Valley, and I used to like to go up on Mount Tam, and I knew a place where I could just lie down in a meadow, and the turkey vultures would circle wondering whether I was dead or not. So it was kind of a personally engineered bird watching thing, and I said to my friend Jim, Jim, the only birds I know are turkey vultures. He says, I can do the art for you. And he did, and we published that. And I wrote about turkey vultures, and I recall getting the first nasty letter that I ever got, from writing about turkey vultures, because turkey vultures do this. They have bare legs, they stand in carrion to eat, and they poop on their legs. It's antiseptic. And the letter I got said I really didn't need to know that. So it was an outdoor kind of thing. I don't know if it's a travel thing, but
Right.
it's an outdoor thing. That was probably the first thing I ever published.
In Rolling Stone, or?
No, that was in the San Francisco Examiner when Hal, what's his name? Was
Oh,
it?
yeah.
Hal, what's his name? Oh, Hal Silverman.
Yeah.
Hal Silverman, oh yeah, for the magazine.
Right. I mean, I published in little literary magazines, but that was the first thing that I did, and they actually paid me like maybe $150.
Wow.
Back then, that was money. Yeah.
Yeah. And what was the first travel sort of assignment that you had, where you actually went out into the wide world beyond the turkey vultures and did the travel piece?
We were coming up on starting Outside Magazine. That's another story, but I went down to Peru, and because I like to walk with a pack on my back, I walked up the Marañón River drainage and found all kinds of pre-Columbian ruins. That was the story. It was it was a great story. I felt, and I had a companion who made the story great because he was psychotic. So, in between looking at ruins from before the Incas came, I got to write about dealing with a psychotic person. A word of advice: never go on a long camping trip with a guy named Laszlo.
Yeah. So,
Give me the gun, Laszlo. Give me the gun. Give me the gun.
was Laszlo a friend of yours?
No, I didn't know Laszlo before I went. No, I went to Peru, and I looked around for somebody that spoke English that purported to know the area. And he did, but he was very hard to deal with.
Yeah. But that was your first real travel piece at that time, where you got out in the world, you discovered something.
Right.
What do you
It's a classic piece, by the way.
What's it? Yeah, I bet. Is it in one of your books?
Yeah, it's Cahill Among the Ruins.
Cahill Among the Ruins.
Yeah.
Nice. So I want to ask both of you what travel writing is for you. I mean, why you do it, but also what you think it is. What is a travel story? Why do you travel write, and what is it? Andrew, what about you?
I asked Paul through what was the point of travel writing.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't have any answer. I said, "What's the merit of it? I mean, what does it add?" I don't know. I think when we share ourselves with people from ourselves, people identify, and travel is one of the things that makes me feel most like me, like the best version of me, and the most generous version of me. And so when underneath every story that I write, and I never write about it per se, but underneath every story is my God, this is an incredible thing, it'll change your life, it changed mine, it's fantastic. And so that's sort of the energy under every travel story I write, and I think that's what made me successful quickly at it, was that unguarded, uncynical passion about this is important, this matters for whatever the reason, it matters to me, and it's not even maybe it'll matter to you, I'm just saying it matters to me and I'm offering it out to you. If it touches anything in you, then great. You know what I mean? So I think when we make ourselves vulnerable to the world like that, or offer ourselves up, we are received. You know, and that's what we have to offer in any regard. So I think that's what is important to me about it and why it matters. You know, you don't have to finish my story and go, wow, now I want to go to Cusco too. That's not the point. It's just, wow, I just experienced something viscerally. And maybe you want to go to, you know, Egypt or something, but it doesn't matter. But we've had a connection, hopefully, or I've offered it to you, and then you received it.
Right. Right.
For me, it's the opportunity to tell stories. If I couldn't travel for some reason or another, I could still tell stories. I love to tell stories. This is about as mystical as you'll ever hear me being, but I believe that there's a great arc of stories across the sky that somehow, when you're writing, and you've all had this experience, I know it, you start writing and you lose track of time. You lose track of time and you know you're doing something good. It doesn't happen every time, but it happens enough. And it's about the best feeling that you can have, except for the romance panel. When you've had a good day, you know it. You know it. And that just, that does it for me. I mean, I think, because I tell stories for a living, I value stories. I think that we as human beings are storytelling creatures. We started telling stories as soon as we could speak around the campfire. We told stories in poetry, Homer, you know, stories that were memorized, that were told in poetry, the Odyssey, the Iliad. And then Gutenberg came along and there was the printing press. And now there's another disruption going on. But what's still important to human beings are stories. Stories are you take a story, it's a little lens through which we see life. It makes sense of life for us.
Yeah.
And why do we tell stories though? To connect with someone.
Right.
And so I feel that's the point, you know. To feel less alone, or less isolated. There's a story, and if you nod your head, I'm doing a good job.
I very much love what you both said. I mean, I think that storytelling is this ancient and abiding human art form that connects us, and that it's twofold for me. I mean, I think that I write to understand myself and to understand my experience, and I come back from a trip and I go, what was that all about? And I delve into it and delve into it and delve into it by writing, and suddenly it begins to crystallize, and I'm like, now I get it.
Yeah. It's sometimes you don't know what it's about unless you write about it.
Totally. Yeah.
Yep.
And then you share it with people, and the sharing becomes a whole nother layer of the experience, and it just kind of takes on this exponential quality.
Well, I wonder if that, because I wrote something once and no one had read it, but my friend said, oh, it's great, you wrote it. I go, yeah, but it's not complete until someone reads it. Me just writing it, to me, it needed a receiver.
For that connection, that
I guess.
completion. Yeah. What has been, this is probably impossible to answer, so that's a good question to ask, is, we'll
just babble.
Right, exactly. I love babbling. What's been the most important hear?
Well, nobody wants to hear it.
Yeah, no. Let me ask, would you like to hear the most important story?
I was at Rolling Stone, and because I was a journalist, I had some contacts, and I ended up writing, the first book I ever wrote was a book about a serial killer. I spent 3 years writing this book in the sewer of this man's mind. I tried to see the world through his eyes, and then I wrote the book, and it was not psychologically good for me to be in that man's mind. It was not psychologically, so I realized immediately that I had this other outlet called Outside, where I could go out and do, well, I could risk my life plummeting off a cliff with a parachute on my back, which is much better for me psychologically than doing the serial damn killer.
Yeah. Can I just ask why you wrote the serial killer book?
It's the only book that I wrote that was a national bestseller.
It's a heavy price to pay for that, but
It was a heavy price to pay, and I was about 5 or 6 years ahead of the serial killer curve. And then every whack job that came down the pike after John Wayne Gacy. Yeah, John Wayne Gacy was my guy, and then we had another Midwestern killer, the cannibal Jeffrey Dahmer. Tim, do you want to do this? No.
does that haunt you still? Is there still a demon that you're exercising from that?
There's a demon in that, and there's a demon in the story that I wrote about Jonestown. And I was down there right after that dance macabre of suicide and murder that was orchestrated by Jim Jones. And man, oh man, that 900 dead bodies rotting in the jungle, believe me, I don't want to do that again either.
Yeah.
Don't join a cult.
What about you, Ian?
The most important story?
Yeah.
I was on a Knowles trip. Knowles at National Outdoor Leadership School. It's sort of this outdoor wilderness education school. And I was on a trip, and one of the people was killed crossing a river. And so years later, I went back to that spot and wrote about that. And to me, it completed the experience, and once I wrote about it, then I owned the experience, and I owned a certain sense of manhood that I hadn't accepted about myself before that, I think, and going back there to that.
What does that mean, a certain sense of
I
manhood?
don't know, just my sort of accepting being a man as opposed to being a guy. You know, in a certain way. I just think growing up, I suppose.
Oh, okay. Got it.
You know.
Okay, so you.
I think I just learned something without knowing that's what I was going to find. I found a certain sense of me, and like taking ownership of myself in a way that because we went and we dragged her out of the river and all this kind of stuff, and you wait for a couple of days when the helicopter comes and gets the body, and trying to write that without exploiting this person, and yet sort of having it be about me without making it about me, because it didn't happen to me. She's the one that died. So trying to balance that, and what's the point of why would we tell that? Why was it important to go back? And things like that. It's just it's interesting.
Yeah.
You made it a story, and the story is the way we perceive our lives. We perceive our lives through stories. Stories are the lenses that you see our life. That's what I think.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And death is as universal as it gets. How we grapple with death. Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you both about is a little bit stylistic and technical, but it's about structure. We've all had this conversation, but one of the things you're amazing at, Andrew, to my mind, is kind of storyboarding a story. Can you talk about the process of doing that?
You mean I usually don't go out in the field till I know what story I'm gonna tell.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I know I'm the opposite of you who go out, Mr. Serendipity goes out there. Great things are gonna happen to me, you know. Apparently you did. I'm sort of the opposite. I'm like, nothing great's gonna happen unless I mean, the story I always tell about that is my wife wanted to go on vacation to Tahiti, and so she said, get a story in Tahiti, and I said, okay, well I can't call up Keith, and now she can go, Keith, my wife wants to go to Tahiti. Okay, Andy, bring back 10,000 words on that. So I did some research on the internet. In 5 minutes, you can discover that 95% of the world's black pearls are farmed in Tahiti. So I went, interesting. Right around then, my mother was having a big birthday, so I called her and said, Mom, do you like pearls? She went, oh, yes, dear, pearls are lovely. So I called up my editor and I said, you know, Keith, my mother has a very big birthday coming up, and when I asked her what she wanted for her birthday, she got a faraway look in her eye. Andrew, my dear, I once saw a single black pearl hanging from a strand I've never forgotten. So, Mr. Editor, instead of going to Tiffany, good son that I am, I'm going to fly halfway around the world. I'm going to go out to the remote Tuamotu archipelago. I'm going to find a pearl farmer who's going to let me dive down into the sea, 20 meters under. I'm going to yank the oyster from the bed. I'm going to come up. I'm going to slice that sucker open. I'm going to pluck my mother's pearl and bring it on home. They couldn't get me on a plane fast enough to write that. Now, the only catch is I knew I could not come back empty-handed, so I didn't even pitch that story until I had found a guy who was going to let me go down there, and do that. And so then I concocted a narrative before that, you know, creative nonfiction. I concocted a narrative of how I was eventually going to find that guy. And by the way, I'm going to visit 3 islands, which they need to have visited so they can sell Tahiti, while I find my way, because I think quest stories make great, you know, they're easy, they give you great narrative art, and, you know, I think if you're going to quest, you better find it, personally. So anyway, that's an example of how I craft a story. And so, you know, I like that song, you know, I know my song well before I start singing. And, you know, and I think as much as that's all said and true, half that story was accident happened, I found there. But I do like to have a sort of post that I can swing to when I get on the plane. You know, and I'd say about 50% is then what I find on the ground. And other stuff, I ask questions looking for evidence of what I'm looking to find.
Do you literally like storyboard or like draw on a sketch pad, sort of A, B, C, swing, 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 like that?
No, I mean, intuitive, I guess, because I've done that so long, is that I just sort of follow, you know, that's what you always talk about when you teach your courses. I mean, there's 1 or 2, you know, 4 little incidents that happen, and then you come back to the first one, and, you know, my story started, that story when it appeared in the magazine started with me standing on the pier, I'm about to dive in. And then I went through all my search, and I came back to me diving in and yanking up the pearl.
Perfect.
You know, so, that's how I sort of started.
That's great. And how do you, your version of storyboarding?
I guess I don't. I have an idea of what I'm looking for. I'll give you an example. I went to Venezuela. There's a place of prairies and high mountains that are flat topped called Tepuis. It's called El Mundo Perdido, the Lost One. And I had this idea. I'd read a book about, I happen to have some skills in caving. I had a caver photographer friend. We were going to go down there and do vampire bats in caves. And we got down there and it all sucked. Nothing worked. And we said, well, wait a minute. How can we make this work? Well, there's a mountain there called Mount Roraima. And that was a mountain that we knew was the mountain that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle had written a Professor Challenger book about, and the book was about these, they are absolutely steep-faced, and there's a large area on the top, and dinosaurs still existed. That was the boys' book that Arthur Conan Doyle said. And And it turned out that he wrote it from the accounts of British explorers, and we said, let's go up there and see if there's any dinosaurs. that became the story, and we found somebody who knew the way to get up there, and we went up to the top, and my photographer friend, who you may know, was a very famous photographer named Michael K. Nichols, Nick Nichols, Nick Danger. There was a little frog about this big, and he blew it up pretty good on the camera and said, "This is about as close as we got to a dinosaur." But you know, it was a story is really about. It goes this way: somebody wants something, and there's obstacles, and they're either overcome or not overcome, and. Andrew said, well, if you do a quest, you better achieve the quest. And my opinion is a little bit different. I think failure is as good a story as success.
I'd say in the right hand. See, I think a lot of why I did that was because I didn't trust myself, trust my writing skills, be able to mine a certain thing. So if I knew my story was sound and sort of successful, then I could drive through it in a certain way. So I think a lot of my questing, and that came from lack of confidence that I could make failure meaningful and feel like victory.
Yeah.
For me, the great example of failure becomes success is Peter Matheson's The Snow Leopard.
Precisely.
You know, he's
But
out
that's
there.
not really about that.
Well, but yes and no.
I mean, that's the event, but that's not what the book
No,
is.
it's not
That's
what the book is.
supposedly his quest.
But that's why he.
Yes, right.
Yeah. Not finding the snow leopard was so successful. But so you're out in the field for 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 4 weeks?
Yeah.
Yeah.
6 weeks.
6 weeks. Okay, so you come.
Sometimes.
You come back and you
Who's
go.
paying you to be out for 6 weeks?
You know,
That was a long time ago. People had budgets
different
back
world
then.
now. It's a different
That was like,
world.
Tim, we got 2 days. Go out there and get the story. So you're out there, you come back, you've got this massive material to work with. How do you put the story together?
It's a pretty boring process. I take copious notes. I take notes like you can't believe. If someone saw me on assignment, they would say, he's exhibiting obsessive writing behavior. He needs to be put away. And I have all these notes. Then I come home and I read my notes. I read my notes every day, every night for a little bit, for a while, until I have them memorized, just about memorized. Because when you start writing, what's going to happen is you have an idea of where you're going and you say to yourself, but wait a minute, didn't this thing happen? And if you have to look through your notes to find it, no, I know exactly where it is. Okay, this thing happened. Oh, right, that fits in with this thing. Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's the way I do it.
But how do you know what step A, B, C, D? How do you figure that out?
Everybody does it differently. This is not the way you're supposed to do it. It's just the way I do it. I write the crux of the story, the scene that I want to write, and I write it first. And that, instead of having to write the lead or know exactly where it goes from the beginning, I just write that part, and then I write another part, and sometimes I write a part that, like, this doesn't seem to go with the rest of the stuff. And then I say, wait a minute, trust your subconscious. Why did you try to put that in there? It probably goes in there. You've got to figure out why it goes in there. And so you have disparate things happening, And when you do that, well, that's called creativity.
Don't you find that's often that thing that, this isn't on topic, well, I'm just gonna write, don't you find that's actually the heart of the story?
Sometimes, yeah.
I've had many experiences, this has nothing to do with, I don't know why I'm on, this is never gonna be in, this is never gonna be in, oh my God, there's no story without this.
Yep.
You know?
Mhm.
Because,
It's so
you know,
powerful.
avoidance is so, we avoid in many cunning ways, you know?
Right.
But I remember I heard you talk about that, what you would do with your notes, you just read them and read them and read them. I dread looking at my notes.
I know.
I dread looking at them because they're illegible, and and I'll avoid reading them certainly while I'm out in the field until I'm right near the end, the night before I go home, in case I have to backtrack some. But I hate looking at my notes, and I often don't need to. The act of writing it down has been enough for me to lodge the things that are actually important and stay in. The rest of the nonsense doesn't take, but the actual thing of writing is enough for me often.
Have you ever looked back on notes that, of something you've written a while ago and looked at those notes? Because what I find is that when I look at, you know, I've been doing it for quite a number of years, and I can look at notes that I wrote 20 years ago, and when I start getting into it, I can feel myself back there. I can feel everything. Even if I didn't write about the smells, I can kind of smell it. And I can hear the dialogue that I wrote down.
I often, my notes will trigger memories that I didn't write down.
Mhm.
I'm writing, oh, he's drinking a beer, and then what actually is important is that you've got a stain on your shirt, and I didn't write that down, but that's what I remember, and that's what leads me into your whole character. You know what I mean? So it's, the note triggers something else that I didn't know what I was looking for when I was writing. That's why I don't take as copious, and that's why I regret not taking great notes. There's some days when I'm out when I won't take a note. And I go back and I go, what the hell did I do all that?
Yeah.
You know, and it's just sort of, but I do think you find, I find a story, and I heard Pico Wire say this, I find this story through my feet. I mean, when I read a writer talk about, as a general rule, if they're quoting the taxi driver, I pretty much finish, I'm done reading it.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's a pretty lazy travel writer. But I find a story on my feet, just walk,
Yeah.
get lost, walk.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Do you try to set aside time every single day to sit down and just position yourself somewhere and write?
Well, you know, you're traveling, so things happen. You don't know whether you're going to have time, and then sometimes you're sitting in some bureaucrat's office, waiting 2 days for permission to go somewhere. Then you can work on your notes. I mean, I was, you know, when Peter Matheson was here, the great Peter Matheson, the only writer that ever won the National Book Award for both fiction and nonfiction. My hero, Peter Matheson, when he told me how he took his notes, I said, oh, right, that's the way I do it. I love it. I have an 8x5 reporter's notebook that I write very quickly in, and if I ever have time, I usually have a large spiral notebook where I transfer those notes into complete sentences and sometimes complete paragraphs, and sometimes those sentences and paragraphs go as written in the spiral notebook into the piece that I wrote.
Yeah, that's when, if I'm disciplined enough to take my scribble notes in the day and at night, take the time to do exactly that, that's gold. 90% of the work's done.
Yeah.
I mean, that's huge. And I often have things, I'll walk down the street and just be walking, and then the phrases come to me, and I'll just write down sentences that go right into the story.
Yeah,
for sure.
That's on the spot.
On the
stuff.
spot,
So
yeah.
incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Contemporaneous notes. Has anybody heard me say contemporaneous
Yes.
notes are
Yes.
very, very important?
Important.
And
Yes.
take contemporaneous notes. Take a lot of notes. That is the way. That's the lazy person's way to do, to get a lot of work done. Because once you go home and try to write things down, you think this is something I'll never forget? No, you will. You will. Believe me. But you look at your notes and you're back there, and you can write it.
How long do you let it sit before, after you come home, till you start writing?
Well, usually because of money constraints, I'm writing right away. But I've had experiences, because I take such copious notes, I have stories that didn't belong in the story that I wrote. And people often call me up and say, Tim, have you ever been to Bali? And, oh yeah, 4 or 5 times. Any stories that you haven't told? Yeah, I got a lot of them. I don't like to do that much, but
It works. It works.
well, yeah.
But it's
And
like
how
some of those
quickly-
old great explorers, they would write their great memoirs. Burton wrote like 40 years after they were in the jungle. I'm like, how did they do that? Anyway,
How quickly do you write after you come back?
it takes longer and longer. I used to come home with a draft, you know, and I'd get on the plane and I'd have a draft, you know, but it takes me long. I avoid more and more and more long. And it's interesting though, and then it's sort of, you know, like it always, the cloud gets bigger and bigger until you're like, oh, then I gotta sit down. And, you know, the longer I let it sit, it's precarious, because like I'll forget, or my note's good enough. But then when I do let it sit if they sit for months, there's a richness that comes that doesn't come with immediate reporting.
Yeah, agreed, yeah. Because there's all this layering that happens.
Yeah, and what's really important.
Yeah, your mind filters it and everything, yeah.
I mean that is true. Months and months later, it's richer. For the most part, I couldn't afford to wait
Right.
months and months. But I absolutely agree with you on that.
Yeah. Do you use cameras or recording devices when you travel?
You know. No. I believe that you have to take notes, that written notes, that you do. Taking notes, I mean, people just hear me harping on this, but taking notes is the major thing that we do. And what you think about is the exterior landscape. What does it look like, and how does it make me feel? And I have an exercise that I give classes that I say, go and look at something, an inanimate object, perhaps a statue. Look at it for 20 minutes. Now you'll feel like a dope, because you'll sit there with your notebook and you'll say, well, it's gray. It's a man on horseback. The horse looks, I don't know, a little excited. I can't. And you'll feel like a dope. You'll feel like a dope. I'm saying do it for 20 minutes. You'll feel like a dope doing it, and suddenly, somewhere in that 20 minutes, you will begin to write a little bit more fluently about it, and then you'll be thinking about, how does it make me feel? And you're looking at that horse and you're saying, that horse and that man, this statue, it seems to be bullying. It's a bullying sort of thing. And then you can write about it. The exterior landscape and the interior landscape.
You're very good at that.
I love that whole exterior-interior landscape. But the exterior landscape alone is not the story.
Right.
It's the interplay.
It's the interplay, and then one has to be very careful.
That's what your gift is seeing, you being able to see the bullying. That's what your gift is.
Thank you. But I think that anybody here can do it if they sit and think about it and allow themselves the 5 or 10 minutes of feeling dopey.
Yes, absolutely. But like mine, if I saw that and I see that, that would remind me of when I was a kid. So and so rode a horse and got thrown off, and it would take me into a personal kind of thing that way. Whereas it takes you, and so that's what I have to offer, and what you have to offer is that sort of taking it into a larger thing, making it very personal, but then keeping it sort of not small about yourself, but taking it to a bigger thing. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I might say, well, this society that built this statue is kind of a totalitarian
But
sort
you're
of.
off to a bigger thing.
Right.
But
And then travel
it
has
doesn't
meaning.
mean that that's a bigger thing. It's a different way of doing it.
Yeah. I mean, they're both good. But, yeah. That's great. I could ask you about 100 other questions, but let me open it
Well,
up.
can I
to-
comment on the photograph thing? Because a
Oh,
lot of
sorry,
times
yes,
now, no,
please.
but because a lot of times we're asked to do photos now and videos, and you know, I get it all the time. You're an actor, so make us a little video while you're on the road, and it is. How much are you going to pay me for that? Oh, we don't have any budget for that. You know? But it's an entirely different job. Thinking
It's
visually,
a different talent.
It's a different job. And you may be good at both, but you can't do them at the same time. I find it very difficult to do them at the same time. If I'm videoing something, I'm not in any way thinking writing or taking. It's just a different experience, different muscles.
It's, you, I say the interior landscape, you need to feel, you can feel when you write notes. The very best photographers, people like Robert Holmes that are here, are able to feel through a lens. Unless you're extremely talented, you cannot feel through a lens. You can feel through.
Yeah, and an iPhoto of something is not taking a note.
Right.
I've learned. I go, I'll just take a quick picture, be quick, and like that means nothing to me when I look at it. Like,
Right. Just bounce right off.
John disagrees with both of us, but.
No, I think it's brilliant what you're saying. Brilliant. Let's see, questions from the audience. Brett?
Andrew, you said in an earlier session that Paul Theroux changed your life. Could you expand on that?
Can you hear in the back? So the
But they
question
asked-
was, Andrew, you said earlier today that Paul Theroux changed your life. Can you explain more about that?
Someone gave me one of his early travel books, Old Patagonian Express, and it's just this whole notion of go alone, go far, don't come back for a long time. I'd never conceived of travel like that before, and so I did that. I went, I'm going to do that, and knowing that someone had done it before, I guess lots of people have done it, but that someone had done it like that, and just I found that to me at that moment I was ready to hear it. It was eye-opening to me.
And what did you do literally? How did you apply that?
I bought a plane ticket in to somewhere, and then like I would travel for months. I bought a plane ticket into Cape Town and out of Dar es Salaam, 7 countries away. 2 months later, and just get there from here, and I'm not going to fly, per se, so get there. And like I would never, things like that. And so I would just travel. I would just go, and I didn't go. That's where I started to learn the difference between vacationing and traveling, I suppose. And so I love vacations; they're great, but it's different than traveling. So, and I found traveling alone to be much. For me, it was my university was traveling. It's how I found myself and how I grew up and how I learned about the world was traveling and I could only do that alone.
I don't know about you guys or most of you guys, but I'm a little shy. It doesn't seem like it, but sitting up here is much easier than talking to someone face to face. And when I'm traveling alone, because we are social creatures, I have to reach out and talk to people. And that's something that being able to force myself to do that is something that opens up my world as well.
And you really have to get the story. You have to.
It's not only to get the story, it's because we're social creatures. I am not going to sit in a hotel and get room service or something. Or watch CNN.
This is a question for Tim. You've had a pretty lengthy and awesome career and have written some really amazing stuff. And I think a lot of us in here would just really admire, you're such a good storyteller. I'm just curious if there's a story in your mind, one story that stands out of all the places you've been, just maybe one of the strangest, most memorable experiences you've had, all your assignments everywhere, something that stands out in your mind and said, this is why I do this, I really love doing this, this is a cool experience.
Yeah, there's a lot of them, and usually when I get a question like this, I just pick one. It's hard to find the most amazing experience. Perhaps one of the more amazing experiences is a story that fell apart on me. I was supposed to go to Irian Jaya, it's West Papua now, and I was in Jayapura where you land, and to get up to the place where I was supposed to go, now there was rioting in the streets, and and you couldn't fly up there, but I could go to the Asmat, which was the largest swamplands in the world. I went to the museum and tried to figure out what I could do in the Asmat, and they had carved canoe paddles. So, well, who are these people? What do they do? And they said, somewhere in the conversation, it turned out that there were some people called a certain tribe of Karawai people who had only been contacted by the outside world the year before. They lived in the swamp. They were hardly even Stone Age. There's no stones there. They had sticks. And I went to the Asmat and I said, you know, this is part of the kind of travel writing that I like to do. It's like, solve the problem. Now, how am I going to get to see these people? Well, I need a translator, and I need somebody who can speak Karawai and Indonesian and English, and I've got to get 500 miles up the river, and I've got to get somebody who can guide me into these people, and then I have to know what they want, because I've got to trade them, because they live 50 feet up in the trees, and so I talk to these, I do this thing, and I go to, to me, it was traveling back in time, and I've never felt such a, it was literally time travel for me.
Yeah, I just want to say, of all the immortal Tim Cahill stories, and I love, Tim's one of my iconic writers, but that story, Among the Karawai, which is in Past the Butterworms, that's the best story Tim Cahill has written in my mind. It's one of the best stories ever written in all of human history. It's an amazing story. It's an amazing, amazing story. It's the last story in Past the Butterworms. You should all read that story. It's what great travel writing can aspire to. It's amazing.
I'm just curious, given that you're both avid readers and aware of the intimacy you feel with the author you're reading, I'm curious what point in the writing process, whether traveling or drafting your book or writing it or speaking up here, at what point do you feel the intimacy with the reader?
At what point do you feel the intimacy with your reader when you're writing?
At what point in the whole process?
At what point in the whole process of creating a story do you feel an intimacy with your reader?
You know what? Are you able to tell jokes? Do you tell jokes? Are you good at jokes?
Maybe not good at them, but I can tell.
But being good at jokes is like being good at drama. It's all the same. It's setup, punchline. You know, a dramatic situation is the same thing. And I'm only thinking of stories. Stories have a certain feel to them, and you know they're right. I think about the readers. I tell the group that I work with to have a jury in their mind. A jury is people that they know very, very well, that cross race lines, gender lines, socioeconomic lines, educational lines, but they are people that you know that are readers that are very good, and you ask yourself, do I have to explain this, or does the jury accept it? And so, yeah, that's what I have it. When I tell a story, I have the jury that I think about.
How about you, Andy?
That makes very sense. When I was writing my book, someone said, just write to, who are you writing to? And that thought had never occurred to me before when I write to. I just, and then I realized about halfway through I was writing to my 10-year-old self.
Oh.
And that seems to be who I always write to. I don't know what that means even, but that just seems like, yeah, that's, you know, and I feel it when I hit it, oh, there it is. This is good.
My thought is always to hit the widest audience possible. And I sometimes put in obscure references that maybe some of the jury won't get, but I think the reader appreciates the fact that you appreciate their intelligence.
Totally. Yeah. And yeah, absolutely. And that's also why I don't use very big words, because I'm writing to the 10-year-old. I think that's very true. I don't mind reading a thing and knowing there's a word beyond me. I like that you have given me credit for that word. You know what I mean?
Right.
Or a literary reference or
totally.
something.
Yeah.
I get it.
Respect your readers. Yes.
So you started this out talking about how everybody, when they start writing, has someone they look up to, and that person started out and was anonymous and no one knew who they were and all of that, right? But I guess this is a question for Andrew, because for you that wasn't really true. You know, when you started out, tons of people knew who you were. And so I would think...
Now no one. No, but to anticipate your question, I mean, that has been one of the things that I've had to overcome or deal with is, you know, preconceived notions, some interloper, some dilettante kind of doing the Uzi thing. This, so the Brad Pack guy from Pretty in Pink's a travel writer, great. Let's read that. And frankly, I kept them separate, very actively and consciously separate for a number of years, because I didn't meet a lot of editors, because you could do it all on email, and you just wouldn't. And then, frankly, I won a travel writing award, and suddenly all that sort of baggage became fascinating, complex history. Because I was out. But I still come across editors all the time, and in a second, I can just, it's just an antenna you get. I can tell if they've got it, and it's their issue, it's their problem. Life's too short, I go to another one. I don't need to deal, you've got it, it's your thing.
But my question was different, and maybe the opposite, but it's sort of...
But that's the one I wanted to answer. I learned that one. You're a politician.
What was your question? What was your question?
I'm just going to leave now. No, my question was, I would think that in the beginning that would make it harder because you would have less freedom. Like if I go out there and I write something, yeah, some people that know me will know it and see me fail if I fail. But for you, when you started, you know, you go out there and you're doing this and you completely flop in the first thing you write. You're not.
The first thing I said to the guy who gave me my first article, I said, right after he gave me the assignment, when I said you didn't have to pay me if I don't do it, then I said, you know, I don't really know how to write a travel article. And he said, good, just do your thing. And so that was very liberating.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, Steph.
I'm really intrigued by what you guys said about the, you know, being shy and then being out in the field. Do you adapt like a certain persona because of the passion of the story that drives you and is able to cut through that shyness? I mean, I'm intrigued by, do you have a persona that's the kind of reporter persona and then your real persona?
So if you're shy, do you adapt a persona out in the field that enables you to overcome that shyness?
Yeah, because you're so passionate. You want to tell
so
that story. You want to get those quotes from the locals.
Well, when I'm in pursuit of a story, I kind of get excited. And I often travel in undeveloped countries and undeveloped, you know, with a backpack on my back, I come into a village, and one of the things that that as a man I have to try to do is, you're not the alpha male here. You know, you've got to be. Here's the way it works: you come into a village a remote village in Ecuador, or Siberia, or wherever, and there's some people there, and either they hold the kids in, or they let the kids out, and the kids might hang around you, and then come the young adolescent males who want to challenge you, and probably you don't speak the language, but you know what they're saying are insults, and people are laughing. About 10 minutes later, older people, the elders of the village, come up. What you do when they're laughing at you, you know they're laughing at you, is laugh right along with them. And then you look at the elder as if, please explain to me what's going on. And that's the way to calm the whole thing down. The shyness, once you're in that situation, they don't have television. You're the colored television. They're going to come to you.
If I'm traveling and not writing, which I don't really get to do anymore, but I would go for days without hearing the sound of my own voice, because I would be I'd still be having a great time, but because when I'm writing, I need quotes. It forces me out of myself, and then you become, in the writing, you become a certain character of self. But my wife was with me once, and I also don't enter. I enter in a very sort of, I don't know anything. Can you help me? Can you help me? What's going on? Kind of thing. And there was a guy being really bombastic and a real just blowhard know-it-all, and treating me, talking down to me, and And my wife said, "Why do you know? You know the answer to that. You know much more than this guy about this stuff. Why?" I just go, I'm just receiving here. I don't need to prove anything. I don't need to step up and be. I'm getting great gold from him. You know what I mean? And the more he's feeling empowered in his world, in his environment, that's what I'm here to find out. Not to prove that I'm man enough to stand up with him. You know what I mean? Yeah, I'm often very just. I don't know anything. And it lets people feel very relaxed, and that's what I want. The minute they know I'm from National Geographic Travel, they either become authorities or they clam up. I want them to be really relaxed. I don't tell people I'm writing for a magazine usually. I'm getting great quotes from you. I just run to the bathroom, write them down. I've had conversations where I've gone to the bathroom 5 times. I think I've got real prostate problems and things, so we're running off. So anyway.
I do tell everybody that I'm writing.
I do at the end, because then I need to get their fact-checking information. So I will at the end, but at the end, not.
Okay. That's
Yeah, you have
do.
to, because,
Yeah.
Andrew, I'd like to know the end of the story. What did your mom think about the pearl necklace?
I've never seen her wear it. Actually, the pearl that I got was absolutely terrible, like a piece of lead, so I gave it to my daughter, my 6-year-old, who loved it, and I went to Tiffany and got my mom a pearl. And I've never seen her wear it.
Did that make it into the story by any chance?
No, that was after.
One more question. Does anyone have a question? Yeah.
Actually, it's just an extension on the issue of shyness. Not so much in the field. I'm interested once you put pen to paper. So you're saying you're not quite comfortable in a social environment as you are on stage. How much have you become as a performer to get that article out?
So shyness as it relates to putting pen to paper and revealing yourself on the page in the writing.
I'm fearless. This is part of being a writer. It truly is. You have to be fearless about, you know what, the best part is where I really screwed up here, and I've got to tell this part of the story because it doesn't work otherwise, or my parents wouldn't like me saying this, but it's true. Your only obligation is to the truth. And your further obligation is to make the story the best it can be. I have people come up to me all the time and say, I want to do this, but I want to do it under a pen name. And I say, but you can't do it. You can't do it. You need to be fearless in your writing. And I might be shy with people, but when I write it down, I'm fearless.
Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, there's no point to do it if you're not going to try to do it. I often play the game with myself, this will never be it. This will never be it. I do that. And then I read it and I'm like, that's no big deal. I know that about myself. Everybody knows that about me. And so you just write it all down.
So I saved one last question. I'll ask Andrew first, I'll ask Tim second, but the same question. What's the most important thing that you've learned as a traveler or as a travel writer? What's the most important thing you've learned? Andrew.
Me?
Ah, sorry.
I thought you were going to say, what's your favorite curse word or something? After studio thing.
Unexamined.
I don't know. Show up. You know, just show up.
Show up.
Yeah.
I'll do one.
The open, yeah,
Riff
go
off of me.
Yeah.
What I found out is people all over the world are pretty much the same. They want the same damn things. They want a place to live, shelter, clean food, clean water. They want to have something that makes them fulfilled, and they want to have time with their family. Those are the things that everybody all over the world wants.
Yeah. And it's great to get away from them all.
So I just want to take a second to say this has been an incredibly exhilarating, extraordinary journey that we've been on conversationally. Thank you all very much.